Get ready for the thrill of victory as Welcome to Mystara brings you an in-depth look at the sports of the known world, calling from numerous sources as well as real-world equivalents and fantasy versions. There are several varieties of entertainments that draw in the crowds. So which sports cross borders and which ones are isolated to a single region? Stay tuned. I'm Mr. Welch and let's get ready to rumble. There is a variety of sports that are common in multiple nations. Horse racing, for example, is ubiquitous in quite a few nations, especially in the more equestrian ones like Ethengar and Yalarum, and of course the Thracian province of Corinthus. The Ethengar and Yalari prefer long-distance racing compared to the shorter races, while Corinthus doesn't care so long as it involves a horse. While racing does have fans in almost every nation except for the dwarves of Rockholm with their hatred of horses, the popularity in other nations doesn't approach the almost fanatic levels as it does in Ethengar. Of course, where there's horses, there is polo, and this is another common sport in the equestrian nations. Ethengar has multiple variants of the games, varying from tribe to tribe, some using a ball and others using a water skin made from some animal. Yalarum has several variants of the game, most of which involve an animal skin rather than a ball, or just do away with clubs altogether and require the rider to physically grab the animal skin and carry it to the goal before having it taken away by force. Corinthus keeps with the more traditional rules of polo and has formalized their rules across the region rather than having multiple versions of the same game as the tribes of Ethengar do. The last of the equestrian sports in Mystara, and by far the most popular from nation to nation, is jousting. The sport is popular among nobles and commoners alike, and every carnival or festival usually involves a jousting match. The rules for jousting have to be formalized across national boundaries, so knights don't have to worry about what rules they're using when they sign up. Jousting is expensive. Few commoners have the gold to afford not just the horse, but the specialized armor required. Every competitor needs to own a suit of jousting armor, specialized full plate that is designed to better deflect a lance hit from the front. The armor is difficult to move around in on foot, and provides little protection from the rear, and is quite expensive, so it's impractical outside of the list. Jousting is quite profitable for both tournament organizers as well as the better jousters. While the sport is largely the exclusive domain of the nobles, there are numerous examples of commoners taking up the lance and making themselves famous. Some nobles spot the talent of a commoner and sponsor them in the list. Other nations like Deroxy have less of an emphasis on nobility, and instead anyone who can afford the armor and the horse, or get assistance from a guild, can join the tournaments. Jousting is popular among racial lines, with every demi-human race except for dwarves jousting. Of special note, the sport is adored by the Fey court, and she-jousters are a welcome sight as they draw in crowds because of their elaborate armor and their exotic appearance. They still have to obey tournament rules, which has caused problems in the past when they are forced to use a horse instead of a unicorn, or actually wear armor instead of just a few strips of magical cloth. Wrestling and boxing are common in every nation. It doesn't require anything more than two people willing to throw down using the rules agreed upon. It doesn't require vast open spaces like the equestrian sports, making them perfect for taverns or public spaces. Wrestling is more formalized, with a huge popularity, again in Ethengar and all of Thyatis. Of the two, it's considered the more elegant sport, and wrestling matches have been held at the Thracian Imperial Palace throughout the ages. Boxing is far more common and is more favored by the lower classes. In the northern reaches, pugilism is an accepted form of trial by combat when the dispute doesn't require the death of either party. In many nations, the constables will let a fight carry on to its conclusion rather than break it up if the fight isn't to the death and taken outside where nothing can be broken, and the parties fight according to the various laws on the sport in that region. Deroxy's contribution to sports is the formal rules for fencing. Unlike other nations, the people of Deroxy prefer lighter weapons like the rapier. Training in this weapon has turned into a sport, with duelists sparring with real weapons for fun. After numerous injuries and a few deaths, the Republic passed several laws banning actual dueling and institutionalized official rules for fencing. The sport proved quite popular with the upper classes. It becomes a test of skill and ability rather than just bloodshed. The lack of actual violence restricts the sport's popularity among the lower classes as they find it boring. For team sports, the definitive sport in Mystara is Alphasia's Hardball. This is a very structured game with official rules and teams. The game is played on a 100-yard by 30-yard field, with the field itself laid out in a checkerboard appearance. The object of the game is to get a ball into the opposing team's net, with the game broken down into 15-minute quarters. Players can't cross from one square to the next if they're carrying the ball, or if they aren't carrying the ball, they can't enter a square with the ball carrier. The ball has to be passed from one square to the next, with numerous rules on what is a legal pass. Breaking the rules results in the player being sidelined until a point is scored, causing the teams to slowly dwindle until someone scores or a team has been penalized so much that they have less than half the numbers of the field than their opponent, which causes a penalty point. Hardball is incredibly popular in Alphasia. It's considered a commoner sport, but even the nobles find themselves cheering for their favorite team. There are numerous leagues of varying talent, and the Premier League's final is an unofficial national holiday in Alphatia. Uncharacteristic of the nation's reputation, magic of all sorts is banned in hardball matches. It's all about pure talent and skill on the pitch. Teams gain fame across the empire, and some people have gotten so far to start wearing clothing in the colors of their favorite team. Skilled hardball players are often hired by better teams, making the game a fast track to influence and power for the best hardball players, something that is otherwise difficult for non-magic users in Alphatia. The game is almost unheard of on the continent of Brune, but King Ericol of Norwal is trying to change that by starting his own league, with limited results. The Tiger Clan of Etrugan has a sport unique to them, Deroxy. It is a team sport played with 5 men a side, with the object to get a ball through a stone hoop. Players are not allowed to touch the ball with their hands or forearms, making the game very challenging. It is a brutal sport, with deaths common among the players. Successful teams can become quite wealthy, while teams that fail to achieve victory are often sacrificed to appease the immortals. The game is a major part of the lethal politics of the Tiger tribes, with matches actually used to divine favor from the immortals by the priests. The Tiger Clan has another diversion they call a sport called Exishi, but that's more of a formal war than an actual sport. There's a lot of adventure hooks you can use with a sports-themed game, from the players having to play the sports themselves, to preventing someone from sabotaging the games, to trying to rig a sporting event to maximize their wager. The games of Thyatis have an enormous amount of sports during their tournaments, though I didn't count gladiatorial games as a sport, because it's more of a combat than sport. If your players have acquired their own domain, then organizing a tournament or a festival can be an adventure in its own right, as you've got to track down athletes and negotiate with the various sports authorities to attract the various athletes, and more importantly, earn a profit. That's sports in Mystara. There's quite a few unique ones that are unique to the setting, as well as more common sports found in the real world that easily transport over. If you like Mystara, please like and subscribe to the channel. I'm trying my best to bring back the greatest Mystara setting, so having a large number of people following me helps immensely with that, at least in the eyes of Wizards of the Coast. Next week we are dipping into the 1005 alternate timeline with the added option to look at New Angmar, the future home of the Shadow Elves. Until then, remember, if winning isn't everything, why do they keep score?